Hi everyone, Kartik Krishna here for Beyond the 90. I don't follow international football the way I used to. I should point that out. And the CONCACAF Nations League is the first real international thing I've watched in a long time. And I'm all about club football. Um, my orientation is that I grew up a U.S. men's national team fan, U.S. women's national team fan. But once I started working in the game in 2000, I started covering the game earlier in the 2000s. When I started working in the game in 2009, um, our institutions, our leagues, everything was so linked to Canada. And Canadians and Americans are basically the same people, right? I feel like they're our cousins, they're our brothers. I don't feel that about any other nation. I don't have that kind of affinity for any other nation, including India, where my family is originally from, right? I don't care that much about India. But I do have an affection for Canada. So when Canada would play the U.S. starting, the 2013 Gold Cup, I remember the match in Detroit. I mean, it was almost like, and I even tweeted this, it's almost like a cousin's war. This is like a brother's war. I'm not as comfortable with my nationalism and rooting for the United States against Canada as I am against Mexico or England or Germany or Spain or whoever. Um, so, I've taken interest in the Canadian national team because I have had a lot of dealings with Canada soccer through the years. And as I said, working in the game, working in NASL, we always had teams in Canada when I was working there. When I was working at individual clubs, we were always playing teams from Canada. There was a symbiotic relationship between Canada and the United States in football, just like there is in society in general, which is why I don't want to get too political, but what's going on right now makes me very uncomfortable. The thing between the U.S. and Canada that's happening currently, economically, politically, and I'm just in general, I'm a free trader, so I hate tariffs to begin with. So I'm very opposed to what's happening. But let's talk about Canada specifically in the Nations League, because I came into the Nations League semifinals thinking Canada were the favorite, thinking they had the best squad, thinking they would win. And the match against Mexico, it was very controversial in 2020 when I think I tweeted that I felt like while the U.S. and Mexico's player pools are better than Canada's, Canada has a better first 11. And I expect John Herdman to be able to take advantage of that, even though culturally, institutionally, they don't have the history. Well, they won the Hex, or the version of the Hex, right? The 8-team Hex. They had the most points in qualifying. They beat the United States. They beat Mexico. They qualified for the World Cup. They were in a much tougher group than the U.S. or Mexico. I mean, I think if they'd been playing Wales, quite frankly, and England, who was the weakest seeded team, one of the weakest seeded teams we've seen in recent World Cup history, they probably would have fared better than playing Croatia, Morocco, and Belgium. So anyway, that out the door. They beat the U.S. in qualifying. They beat the U.S. in a friendly last year. They've never historically beaten the U.S. very often. And I just felt like they had a better 11, first 11, led by Fonz, right? Led by Alphonso Davies, by the way, who is someone we should be very proud of. A player who came through the development system here in North America, played in both USL and MLS before getting to Bayern Munich. So I look at the team and I look at the way Jesse Marsch has integrated Kone. And again, they were actually the CONCACAF nation that did the best in Copa America last year. Got to the semifinals, lost Tejan Buchanan in that quarterfinal match. I think they would have been more competitive in the semifinals against Argentina if they had him. But when you look at Kone being integrated, Schaffelberg has gotten better. Estacio, I think, is really good in the midfield. Buchanan, Osorio is now a bit older, but you're looking at a really good midfield to complement Fonz and complement Jonathan David, who I should mention, it's been a few years, and he's still at Lille, American-born Jonathan David, but he scored the most important goal in the Liga season a few years ago when Lille beat PSG, who was managed by Mauricio Pochettino at the time, to the title. So, again, just think, and Kyle Laren's a player I followed from very early stages at UConn and in Orlando, and Richie Larea is a player I've covered very closely through the years he's hurt currently. Kamal Miller, another guy I've covered. So I really felt like Canada, maybe 1 to 11, maybe 1 to 14 or 15. As good, if not better than the U.S., definitely better than Mexico. And they have in Jesse Marsch, to me, the guy who is the elite manager in this region. Granted, Mauricio Pochettino is got global pedigree, but in terms of just American, Canadian, Mexican managers, or Central American managers, he's the elite manager. He's the guy. You might remember in 2018, I had tweeted in response to Lexi Lawless that the U.S. should have one candidate they interview, which was at the time the coach of the Red Bulls, New York Red Bulls, Jesse Marsh. He didn't get interviewed. They interviewed Berhalter. They chose not to pursue him the next time the job was open, so he's managing Canada now. So that leads me to where I am, what I'm about to say, which is that in spite of beating the United States, which I think is a great victory for them, and the PM Mark Carney, the leader of the NDP, saying all the politicians, right, were piling on, talking about how great it is to beat the United States at this moment of tension. There was an underachievement in this semifinal and final. This is Canada's window to win something in CONCACAF, maybe the Gold Cup this summer. Although it's always tough when things are on U.S. soil, I have to admit. Now, the match against Mexico gave up an early goal, but the balance of play from that point until the second goal, which was after a kind of a cynical foul in the midfield, was all in Canada's favor. Right? They created chances. The composure, the finishing wasn't there. And that's kind of strange when you consider the quality of the players that I mentioned earlier. The officiating in that match was questionable. And Jesse Marsh was concerned, right? You could tell during the course of the match he was getting more and more frustrated. That would boil over in the third place match. We're not getting to that yet, though. But this, when I talked to some of my Canadian friends after the match, they said, once again, we got CONCACAFed. We got CONCACAF. Mexico got all the calls. I can't disagree with that. At the same time, Canada had 5 or 6 great chances to equalize the match after it was 1-0, and they didn't take any of them. 1 or 2 of them may have been influenced by poor officiating. 4 or 5 of them were clear-cut chances that one of them should have been buried to equalize the match. And then after the second goal, after the free kick, Canada really didn't create another good chance until stoppage time. By that time, it was too late. So I was a little disappointed by the lack of composure, the lack of finishing. Yes, officiating an issue. Now, in the third place, but really at this point, Canada should be beating Mexico. Even though it was a very partisan pro-Mexican crowd, I concede that. But I've never been one, even when it comes to the United States, to make that excuse. Because to me, the crowd is one thing. But understand when U.S. men's national team fans used to make the excuse, oh, it's like playing in Mexico. No, it's not like playing in Mexico. If you've ever been to a match in Mexico or in Central America, you know it's not like playing a match in Mexico. The stadiums are American. The locker room is American. The bus you take, the drive to the game is American. The hotel you stay in is American. It has all the trappings of being at home until the 90 minutes. So all of the preparation for the match, the training grounds you use are American. And I will say the same thing for Canada. It's pretty comfortable generally to play in the U.S., although now obviously there's significant political tensions between the two countries. But that's not an excuse. I was disappointed. I didn't watch the U.S.-Panama game, and want to thank Daniel Feuerstein for summarizing that for me. I did watch the Canada-Mexico game, and even though Canada created all these chances, I was disappointed by the lack of finishing. So then let's get to the third place matchup against the United States, which obviously Canada won. And Jesse had a good setup for that match. I think Jonathan David, who, as I mentioned, was born in the United States, was particularly motivated. Good performance for Canada, but Marsh, again, he gets sent off in this match because of some of the officiating. Now, or his contesting some of the officiating. I think the calls were pretty close. I think they were 50-50 calls. I don't think, like the Mexico game, they were clearly bad calls. Maybe that's my American bias. I don't know. But I felt like each of those calls you could go either way. I think the official, she didn't do. Well, I'm trying to remember. Was it a he or she? I thought it was a female official. She didn't do a terrible job. I mean, I thought it was. I thought some of the officiating was. These are tough calls, right? You have to make determinations in the area sometimes. The specific non-call which Marsh got sent off for, I thought that was probably a good no call. That was not a penalty. It was close, but I thought it was good defending. Ultimately, Canada comes through and wins this match. I felt like in the midfield, Canada was particularly good. The American midfield of McKinney, Adams was playing further back, but Adams, McKinney, Pulisic, they were very poor, right? Luna might have been the only good player in the American kind of center of the pitch, pushing wide. Truthfully, I mean, I don't know if there was disinterest from the U.S. Like I said, I hadn't seen the Panama game, although my understanding is they didn't play particularly well in that game either. But again, I think Canada 1-11 is probably, in my estimation, slightly better than the United States. And now they've beaten them several times, drew them and beat them in qualifying, right? So 4 points against them in qualifying, and beat them in a friendly last year, beat them in this competitive match this year. So they've head-to-head, they played very well against the United States. And I do think 1-11, Canada is better. But that doesn't mean I don't think the United States has a very solid core. I just think Canada right now has got a bit of a golden generation, and they're better. And I've talked about the midfield, guys like Kone, who was not really was not in the mix during qualifying a couple of years ago. I mean, he's emerged at Rennes as a very, very good player in Ligue 1, good player for Canada. And you've got other players in the setup. They continue to produce good players, partly using the American system, which is something that is that I think is been pretty beneficial to them, even though at times they've argued it hasn't been so beneficial to them. Canada also, I should mention, they're now winning battles for dual nationals. I mean, we think about Owen Hargreaves, we think about Esmir Begovic, we think about De Guzman, right? All these dual nationals that they lost battles for through the years. When you look at a guy like Daniel Jebison, I don't know that he would necessarily get into the England team, but he potentially could. They've won that battle. They won the battle for Jonathan David. They've won a number of battles for dual nationals recently. Kind of like the U.S. started to win those battles in order to build something. Although they're not as reliant on dual nationals as the U.S. was when the U.S. was playing particularly well, right? When the U.S. had its highest apex. The U.S., although I would argue maybe the U.S.'s best period was really 2009 to 2011, in spite of that 2002 World Cup run. I think that was the best American team, and if you hadn't had the injuries to Gooch and to Charlie Davies and Stu Holden, you might have seen a team that got to the World Cup semifinals or even the final. All right, that was the best U.S. team under Coach Bradley. And the team has not been as good since, right? And Klinsmann's teams and Berhalter's teams were really reliant on dual nationals, which is a shock 30 or 35 years into the era of heavy spending on soccer infrastructure. You're still dependent on dual nationals. And now Pochettino kind of moving away from that. Canada has never been as dependent on dual nationals, but if they had won some of the battles for high-level players, I mean, you just think of Owen Hargreaves, who was England's best player in the 2006 FIFA World Cup, who was an important part of a Bayern Munich team that won a lot during that period, and then I guess Manchester United after, right, won a Champions League with Manchester United. You're thinking of like really high level players. So I am disappointed, but quite frankly, disappointed Canada did not win the Nations League. They were set up to do it. Officiating is something, and the response was good against Mexico, but conceding a goal early and then, not finishing those chances, I think was a problem. And then a good response against the United States, a team that they've been beating a lot recently. But it was a third place game. It wasn't the title match. So, and obviously, considering they would have gotten Panama in the final, it was wide open for them. And they didn't take it. So that's disappointing from my perspective.